Now I would like to welcome the Director of Global Pulse, Robert Kirkpatrick, who's going to give the keynote address for the event. Thank you, Robert.
So I'm beginning to suspect that the 21st century's take on the oft-cited Chinese curse is something along the lines of, may you have to figure out how to keep running your organization halfway through a massive global paradigm shift. Good morning. My name is Robert Kirkpatrick. I direct the Global Pulse Initiative in the Secretary General's office. I'd like to express my thanks again to Social Media Week for giving us the opportunity to hold these discussions here today, to our sponsors, the UN Foundation and the Vodafone Foundation, for their generous support, and to Helsinki Group for their hard work in bringing all the pieces together, to PSFK for their compelling and, to my mind, rather jaw-dropping report, to David Brancaccio for agreeing to moderate, and to the talented panelists who will help us explore today what it means for institutions like the United Nations to engage in real time. And thank you, all of you, for joining us here as well. I'd like to begin with a brief bit of background on the journey that brought me here today. I have spent more than 15 years designing and developing technologies to help teams work together more effectively. For the past decade, I've had the privilege of supporting relief and development organizations in their responses to everything from natural disasters and conflicts to food crises and disease outbreaks. I was Chief Technology Officer of an NGO dedicated to building capacity for grassroots innovation in public health and disaster response. And I've led software development for 2 private sector innovation teams focused on improving collaboration during emergencies. I've done field work in Iraq, Afghanistan, New Orleans, Pakistan, and Cambodia. I've seen firsthand what works, what doesn't, and why in harsh and demanding environments where technology and people perform poorly, where information overload rules the day from dawn to dusk, and where the cost of delay may be measured in human lives. In humanitarian relief, where the standard tool for coordination is a 2-way radio, and where every second counts, anything less than real time is unacceptable. The problem with 2-way radios, though, is that the population you're trying to assist generally don't have them. Affected communities have local knowledge, they have useful expertise, and they have time-sensitive information that responders need. And the citizens, too, need information so that they can participate effectively in response. But without a common platform for communication, they are often left out of the loop in real-time coordination on the ground. This problem has dogged relief efforts for years. The response to the tragic earthquake in Haiti last year, however, showed us the first glimpse of what might be possible in years ahead. To be clear, much of what happened in Haiti did not go nearly as well as it might have. Yet by wiring up SMS text messaging to web services online, volunteer technologists created the first proof of concept of a platform that could enable disaster coordination in real time over a common platform, a hybrid of mobile phones and the web that was able to link government, first responders, communities, and volunteers around the world. It is now possible to imagine a world in which institutions with a mandate to respond to emergencies engage openly, directly, and in real time with both affected communities and communities of practice around the world who are eager to help. Governments and institutions such as the UN are now immersed in discussions over what kinds of tools, processes, policies, and institutional structures will be needed to enable them to join forces effectively with a self-organizing swarm of volunteers. The UN Foundation and the Vodafone Foundation are partnering with UN OCHA and the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative on an eagerly awaited report on these very issues. The first of our panel discussions today will explore some of the changes we are seeing in how institutions engage with communities in an operational context and hopefully give us a sense of where things might be heading. Yet while disaster relief moves into the world of real-time community engagement, global development is still mired in the world of the past. It took the largest financial crisis in human history for us to realize just how badly we need real-time information for development. When the crisis hit in 2008, world leaders needed to make policy decisions quickly to protect their most vulnerable populations from shocks, and they needed to base their decisions on hard evidence about the impact that the crisis was having. But what they found was a massive information gap. The only hard evidence on how these populations were doing were statistics that were 2 to 5 years old. And there's the problem. Statistics are essentially a form of historical record keeping. They take too long to collect and validate to be of any genuine use in an emergency. In the next few years, as the statistical evidence from 2008 and 2009 begins to trickle in, we will begin to piece together our first accurate picture of what actually happened to many of these populations during the first few years of the crisis. We may learn for the first time, for example, that parents in a hard-hit community were pulling their kids out of school to work in the market. Finding this out in 2011, though, this is years too late to prevent harm that will last them a lifetime. Few of these kids will ever return to school. But what if world leaders in 2008 had been able to discover this within a matter of weeks? There would still have been time for them to take steps to provide assistance to families to keep those children in school. It was this tantalizing alternative history that drew me to Global Pulse last year. For me, it represents an extraordinary opportunity to work within the context of a global institution to bring development into the world of real time that the disaster community takes for granted. So let's talk about what it would take to close this gap. So much of what we do today, we do online, whether through computers or mobile phones. We search for information, buy and sell goods, do our banking, coordinate with coworkers, and share our experiences with networks of friends, wherever we are, whenever we wish, in real time. And as we do so, we are generating vast quantities of what has come to be called data exhaust, the ambient information produced largely for free, merely as a byproduct of our going about our daily lives. People in developing countries, too, are generating data exhaust. Mobile phone coverage in the developing world is expanding at an accelerating rate, and governments, agencies, and the private sector are providing communities with phone-based services such as banking, online commerce, healthcare, agricultural information, and job hunting. Increasingly, members of the same vulnerable communities Global Pulse strives to protect are generating data exhaust through their use of services. This kind of information is being produced in real time across the face of the globe, and the cost of generating it is rapidly approaching zero. The cost of storing it is rapidly approaching zero. Yet while corporations use this information to better understand their customers, identify emerging markets, and make investment decisions on the fly, governments and institutions such as the UN aren't. We are practically swimming in real-time data today, and it isn't being used for development. It's well known that as populations begin to feel the impacts of a slow onset crisis, their collective behavior changes. At Global Pulse, our working hypothesis is that these changes extend to how affected populations use services, particularly those through mobile phones, and how they participate in programs run by governments, agencies, and NGOs. You've seen Google Flu Trends, the interesting things people are doing with Twitter data, and the other projects described in the future of real time. We believe it should be possible to develop the capacity to mine data exhaust being generated by vulnerable populations to detect the characteristic signatures of those changes in collective behavior that first show up in the early days of a crisis. In essence, we propose to use community services as human sensor networks for crisis monitoring. Who knows? One day, perhaps, entrepreneurs will even design commercial services with this dual purpose in mind. Let me give you a brief example of what we're thinking about here. There's a service in Bangladesh called Cell Bazaar, designed in collaboration with a group of students at MIT, where 20 million people use mobile phones linked to bank accounts to buy and sell everything from cows to sacks of rice to household items. When the crisis hit 3 years ago, on the Pulse team, we find ourselves wondering, what changed in that network? Did people begin to sell items they don't normally sell, or for higher or lower prices? Were there corresponding anomalies in the data exhaust around farmers' hotlines, money transfers, health hotlines, and the like? If we'd known what to look for in 2008, we would have been able to detect these anomalies. Teams could have been sent into communities to gather the hard statistical evidence needed, and perhaps a lot more kids would still be in school today. By analyzing this kind of data from past crises, we hope to learn how to protect populations more effectively in the future. So that's our mission. In developing our approach, we realized early on that a purely top-down approach wasn't going to work. We must harness the forces and the new tools of self-organization and build this global system from the ground up. I'm sure the UN isn't the organization you would probably turn to first for high-tech innovation. Yet as we see it, the UN in the 21st century is actually in a remarkable position with its global reach, development expertise, and convening power to fulfill its charter in an entirely new way. We have massive potential to serve as a catalyst for the grassroots technical innovation needed to make Global Pulse a reality. The challenges before us, however, are humbling, and we do need your help. This year, as we grapple with how to bring global development into the world of real-time big data, we are actively exploring ways to engage with new partners in new ways using new tools. Private sector data exhaust clearly has a role to play in helping us fulfill our mission to protect vulnerable communities, and we need to figure out how to make it possible for corporations to make it available for development. If we can develop a robust framework for using anonymized and aggregated data exhaust in ways that protect individual privacy and the intellectual property of the corporations themselves, imagine the possibilities. We envision a world in which openly sharing rich sets of real-time data is widely recognized as a high-impact form of corporate social responsibility. Last week in Davos, some of you may have noticed that the phrase data philanthropy spontaneously emerged in a conversation with the World Economic Forum. I find it rather catchy, but then I'm biased. Global Pulse needs data philanthropy to become a reality. To this end, in the coming months, we'll be working to identify a leadership circle of public and private sector partners to work with us to take this idea forward. We'd love your ideas on who we should be working with. Emerging technologies, too, have a role to play in Global Pulse. As we begin developing our technology platform for analysis of real-time data, we'll be doing so in close collaboration with the open source software community. Now, open source developers and UN development experts might not at first glance appear to have very much in common. Yet open source grew out of the hacker movement of the 1970s, and the UN of today still practices a grassroots approach known as participatory development that also appeared, not coincidentally, in the 1970s. Both movements spring from common ideological foundations, the belief that when communities are involved in the process of solving their own problems, they gain a critical sense of ownership, and the solutions that emerge are more likely to be sustainable and effective and appropriate. As we develop the architecture for our technology platform, we'll be hosting and participating in bar camps, hackathons, code sprints, and other events around the world to move us toward implementation. Longer term, we'll be exploring how we might work with our agency partners to establish a sustainable mechanism for harnessing the creative energies of talented technologists around the world with a passion for social impact and a willingness to volunteer their nights and weekends to build better tools for relief, development, peace, and human rights. And again, we'd be grateful for your ideas and suggestions. And if you'd like to get involved directly in building our platform with us, please let us know. So we are experimenting with new approaches, new partnerships, and new tools. Yet as we started to work through the operational implications of Global Pulse last year, we realized that the only way to obtain and maintain access to streams of real-time information on the well-being of populations was to engage directly with networks of individuals on a massive scale. In this fast-changing world, the UN must continue to change and evolve as an organization in order to be able to continue to fulfill its mandate. Information is power, and in the information age, information may increasingly be purchased only with the common currency of information. As we move into the world of real-time engagement, the emerging culture is one of reciprocity. If institutions want information from communities, they must provide them with useful information in return, and quickly. At some point, this exchange becomes an interactive feedback loop and then blurs into something truly participatory. It becomes collaborative problem solving in a virtual team and coordination between an institution and various communities on the outside. Here, organizational boundaries and institutional mandates begin to blur as well. We are just beginning to come to terms with what will likely be recognized as one of the defining challenges of the decade. The rules of the game are changing in ways that are exciting, but also deeply unsettling for institutions. The high latency way of doing business is a thing of the past. Now is king. And if you want it real time, you have a responsibility to reciprocate, indeed to interact in kind. Sustainable access to the kind of real-time institutions increasingly need to fulfill their mandates requires open engagement, and technologies that are used for this are those that communities use in ways that allow decentralized organization and self-organization. Citizens are playing an increasing role in helping institutions fulfill their mandates, but both the roles and the balance of power are shifting. The new technologies powering much of this transformation are profoundly disruptive, not only for the open and direct forms of engagement that they allow, but also because institutions are beginning to realize that these tools allow citizens to hold them accountable in real time. These evolutionary pressures and the evolutionary fitness landscape that seems to be emerging will be the topic of our second panel today. This particular paradigm shift isn't something to be afraid of, and at any rate, it's coming whether we like it or not. In fact, it's already arrived, and it's changing facts on the ground. For institutions such as the UN to remain relevant in this century, we need to begin adapting to this new reality, and indeed, we already are. Today is part of that process. You are part of that process. Thank you for joining us here today. Let's get started.